This conference will now be recorded.
All right, everybody. We're continuing our focus on business issues with chiplets, and today it's going to be Kash, Michael, and I believe Marek who's on. So
Yes,
you can
I'm
take
here.
about 15 to 20 minutes. Kash, all yours.
Okay, so the basis for this is the common presentation we made at the Chiplet Summit with, so it was myself with my compatriot Mao Wang, who's with QuickLogic. And I think the main issue or discussion point we wanted to have was, everybody's really excited about the chiplet market and they think it's a great idea. The economic story is fantastic. The hype is there. So just try and look at from as developers or providers, what are some of the issues that an end customer might have as they look at this, right? So there's definitely that customer excitement. And then there's like, they've got to, really understand a number of things, which is like, what IP do you need? What are the standards? What are the issues with known good die or the chiplet itself? What will I do with this chiplet, once I have a chip? And obviously, how do I market it too? So those are some of the questions that we sort of try to cover. So my issue for a while has been that it's really difficult for people in that mode to say, okay, where do I go to get information? And it's still a pet peeve of mine, which at some point I'm going to do something about. But the questions are, what process am I going to use, right? So what process fits my target market, the technology I want? And obviously there's more and more choices as time goes on. And obviously which foundry. Then as you learn more, you'll figure out about packaging, right? Standard, advanced. But what does that really mean to a chiplet developer? I think that they can look at a bump map, but it may not make much sense, particularly if you're a business guy or whatever, trying to understand everything. And then obviously, which vendor to use, and obviously there's, what's compatible, what isn't. There are no easy answers to all of this, right? And the link layer is still shrouded in some mystery. I know that we're working on with one on one. UCI guys have theirs sort of specced out pretty well. So that's in that space. And then what speeds am I going to support? And the challenge here is that everybody's trying to go faster, right? So first we were at 16, and then the other guys jumped up to 32. So now there's 32 going on. And I think Elad at this week's call talked about 40 gig plus, which is super exciting, but it again starts to have certain challenges, right? If you're trying to build something that there's going to be a market for 2 years from today, right? As a chiplet vendor, and does power matter? And okay, I've got this bump map. How does it get power? How does it get control? So those are, if you look back on it and at that 50,000 foot level, those are sort of really sort of complex things that they need to understand. So quickly on the standard side, I mean, we all sort of know this, right? That, Bo and UCIe are both have their advantages and disadvantages. And from a customer standpoint, to a certain extent, they care, but they don't really care, right? They just want something that works that they can sell, right? So what do? Do they support both? And they may need to consider that, because if you develop a chiplet in even 7 nanometer, which is not the most leading edge node for a couple of years out, the cost is millions and millions of dollars. So it's a huge barrier. Somebody, I think it was Nick, at their excellent webinar that you were on, Bapi. They were talking about standards, and they said that, he made the comment that with DRAM, it might be like DRAM, right, where you've got DDR4, LPDDR, whatever, right? There's like 4 guys. Well, what that means as a chiplet developer, you're going to have to spend millions of dollars and choose that standard. And if you've got the wrong one, you're going to have to spend another 10, 15 million dollars, right? So it's not quite the same as developing or choosing the latest standard, for example, right? So there's some challenges here that we really need to sort of pay some attention to. I think the known good die is
Hey, Kash.
obviously yep.
So I thought Nick's comment was pretty good too. So, but on the DRAM standards, it looks like, different applications sort of know what standard they want.
Right.
Do you see that happening in this space too? I'm asking, not. I mean, the reason there are 4 standards is it's sort of.
I don't know. I think there is, but I also see the Bow guys and the UCI guys kind of asymptoting to very similar. We didn't have redundancy. They came in with it. Now we have redundancy. We now have sidebands. So I'm not sure. I'm just asking the question. I'm trying to look at this from the customer standpoint, right? Because I think both standards are going to keep changing and improving, right? But that builds a barrier if you think about it from an investor that's going to spend 15 or 20 million dollars, right? Am I going to have a market for what I'm developing because the standard may have changed? Even if you just look at the advanced data center type market, right? So I think this is something, because we're so focused on the standard itself and getting ahead and innovation, we need to step back, I think, a little bit and look at it from the customer standpoint, right? And frankly, the same thing is happening. It's even worse in the packaging side, right? Because I'll just say it's a bit of a mess because the foundries are involved, the OSATs are involved, and there's innovation going on, and everybody's being very secretive about what they have. So it's quite challenging from a customer standpoint to be able to compare, what the best thing for them to do is, right?
So Kash, I mean, I was in the webinar, and actually, I don't agree with the analogy of the DDR and the market segment. The analogy of a die-to-die interconnect to a DDR does not add up for me. See, the issue, and I think like you kind of pinpointed it, is how messy it can be. So besides the die-to-die, the different, for example, the UCIe and the bench of wires, that is one aspect. But then when it comes to advanced packaging, I mean, I don't know,
right.
from a chiplet perspective, should they design for a CoWoS? Should they design for an EMIB? Should they design for both? See, that's where the number of permutation can get even messier with the chiplet, even if we converge on a single die-to-die that
No,
are
I agree.
Yeah.
I completely,
But
yeah,
I
maybe it
want to
wasn't a
add.
great, maybe it
No,
wasn't a
but I
great
want to add.
analogy, but I think it is an important point. Sorry.
No, so Kash, the only point I want to add is I think interfaces, whether it is BOW or UCI, and then when it comes to packaging choices, so the more open choices I would say is like fan out or silicon interposer or CoWoS type of application. And when it comes to EMIB, that is not truly an open because only one company in the entire ecosystem can do EMIB today.
Easy copy.
Right. I'll just make a simple analogy. You want to use TSMC as your chiplet vendor for many reasons. Like I just use that as an example, right? They're the #1 fab. You want to do advanced packaging. Your choices are not limited by what you want to do, right? How do you prototype? How do you do an MPW run in the type of packaging that you want, particularly if you're a smaller company? There's a whole lot of things to consider here. And I think that's, and I think the points that everybody has made is extremely valid. There's a lot of permutations and complexity that you don't think about when you just say, oh, there's this massive, chiplet market, and I need to be doing something in this space, right? I think that's the bigger point, and I think I hope there's no disagreement on that. I think it's quite challenging to make those decisions. At least from people that I've talked to, right? So that are actually trying to build an open chiplet system. If you're doing a closed chiplet system, the decision is very straightforward. It doesn't really matter what you use, right? You choose the best that's available now for your application, right? It's an easy decision, naturally, right? Based on price and performance, because you're going to be selling a complete subsystem or a complete chip. So how they're connected internally doesn't really matter to your end customer, right? So there is a difference there that's quite substantial.
Hey, Kash, I had a quick question on the previous slide.
Sure.
On your second bullet, what do you mean by bow is more bare metal? Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so you as a designer have a lot more choice, right? So let's say you want to do advanced packaging. UCIe gives you, it has to be 64 links, right? It has to be tall and thin, right? The specific bump map. It's maybe I shouldn't be going into that level of detail, but whereas with a bunch of wires, it's kind of, there's nothing specified that's different between standard and advanced, right? So if you want to build, there's nothing to stop you from just doing a 16 lane, 32 gig per link implementation, right? And so it's freer. It's kind of, again, a bad analogy. Probably it's like Linux versus Microsoft, right? So Linux gives you a lot more. You can kind of do what you want, right? To more of an extent. It's more flexible. So you could do. I mean, I think we have an 8-bit version of Bow now, right? Which I think is great, because there are companies who don't need a terabit of interconnect, right? It's much more flexible from my standpoint, right? And I think with Bow 2.0, we add a number of features that are interesting, right? Which it also, but the key thing is that Bow 1.0 and Bow 2.0 are they really compatible, right? So I'm just using that as an example, and I'm sure there's going to be a Bow 3.0 at some point, right? So,
wait, if Bow 1.0 and 2.0 are not compatible, that would be news to the Bow team, right? Am I missing something?
If I do a chiplet that company A does a chiplet with redundancy and for whatever reason, right? The other one doesn't, and they're expecting, So now again, how is it going to connect, right?
Well,
Because I'm just using that as an example.
yeah, so maybe it's worth clarifying the spec, but there is definitely a clear expectation that you will support the intersection of the features on the two communicating interfaces. But it's a fair point if it's not clear in the spec. But I believe the expectation is interoperation is a must. Backward compatibility, excuse me.
Okay. You've got one chiplet that's in advanced packaging with 45 micron bumps, and the other one with 130. How do they talk? They don't, right? So there's, I'm just, it's bigger than just the standard details, right? So that's all I'm saying is there's
100%.
a bunch of other parts that are part of this whole mess. So we as people who are trying to sell into this market have got to sort of figure things out of, okay, what are sort of almost at a higher level, what is going to work for this type of customer, maybe, it's like sort of a market specific type of, hey, this is the preferred way to do things. And I think that will happen, right? As more and more developers and as people get, as the market develops, right? But right now, there's still things for customers to, as they start scratching the surface, that become more difficult. It's like trying to transport a PCI Express over Bow. It's not as easy as you would think, right? Whereas with UCIe, it's very straightforward because it's very clearly defined, the standard, So there are certain different applications that are natural fits, but over time those will sort of, I think become easier.
Wait, one more question. How many of the people you talk to are trying to define a chiplet for a market as opposed to a chiplet to sell to a couple of specific customers?
That's a great question. I think that we have people in both. I would say both spaces. And
about 50 even, lopsided?
Probably, yeah, I would say it's pretty even. And it may be a little lopsided because obviously we as an IP company are also looking at other chiplets that, like IO chiplets that we do, that could be suitable for a merchant market, right? Which makes sense as an IP company, to start looking into that. So as we look into it, it's confusing, right? And we're kind of in the middle of this. So that's part of the why I'm raising this to the general community is, hey, and we expect all these thousands of customers are going to start developing chiplets and start using chiplets. It's not going to be quite as easy as we think.
Thanks, Kash. So basically, you're saying bare metal is nothing but what you mean is you have flexibility going from 8 bits to 64 bits. That's what you're referring to.
The bump map, it's not as prescriptive, right?
Okay.
So you're
because I was thinking in terms of protocol also, wondering if you had any behind the mind thoughts on Bow is more on the physical side versus UCIe, allowing protocol transport focus.
Yeah, Bow is more of an open, do what you want kind of thing, right? I mean, our link layer isn't out, but people like Ventana and others are kind of able to do their own thing, right? So, and I see customers doing that, right? So they're not. I think the bunch of wire standard is advantageous from that standpoint. If you want to get, I would say, the highest level of performance, you can, but the challenge is that you may not be compatible with with the next chiplet, right? So I think for chip to chip, it doesn't matter, right? If you're a closed system, it becomes a bigger issue when you want to build something that's open.
Yeah, Kash, actually, I would like to concur with you because flexibility, sometimes it's good. From an architectural standpoint, I agree. Bench of wire provides you that flexibility. From an open chiplet ecosystem, that's going to be problematic. Even the number of bits for support, I think kind of like the UCIe, when they mandated either 64-bit or 16-bit, at least when you pair it with another chiplet, even though you don't need the bandwidth, that is what it's going to support. Having that flexibility on the bench of wire, it's good from an architecture standpoint, and as you mentioned, from kind of a die to die. And if you own both the two dies that you're pairing, but the minute you go to an open chiplet ecosystem and you end up with different chiplet with kind of that flexibility, it's going to be problematic.
Yeah, and one of the other questions that was raised during the seminar was like memory, right? When will the memory vendors, will they ever support, Bow or UCIe? I mean, I know that there's HBM, right? But let's say that one of the vendors did support UCIe, that would be problematic for Bow because I think that would drive a lot of people into that direction as an example, right? Or if they chose bunch of wires versus UCIe because it's easier, right?
Hey,
that would drive
Kash,
a lot of people.
Sorry, man. I know we're getting into one of the topics that takes up a lot of airtime, Bo and UCIe, but I have to
Okay,
get.
sorry.
No worries. It's you're engaging as always. So
Yeah, I'm already stuck. I'm just stuck in my first few slides, so I apologize for taking a while. But okay, let's
no
keep
worries.
going.
I need to get my.
Uh, so I just, this is obviously a big issue for the market that we all understand about known good die. When is it a known good die? What happens with the supply chain? Who's responsible? Let's say the die is stored for many years and then it's shipped to the OSAT. It's less of an issue, obviously, when you have a closed system. I think it's a huge issue as you go to an open system. And I would say that you building in redundancy, because particularly in the smaller chiplets, is not is critical, because it's really tough to rework any of this stuff and fix it in the field. And we all understand the concept of the $5 chip killing a bunch of other $50, $100 chips, right? So and nobody's got a good answer for that. And then the other thing is just adding security. I think a lot of people are already on this. I don't think this is controversial, but somehow people have to start thinking about putting root of trust into your chiplets, particularly if it's an open market. It's a big enough issue with a package device, but now you've got die. So as an end customer, let's say you're buying chiplets from multiple sources and they're being put together by your vendor, you can see a train wreck coming, right? So there's a bunch of issues here. I think on the validation part, as we all know, there's no validation system yet. I know that we've got something here within a bunch of wires where the matrix and blue cheetah are communicating between two chips, and I think that's a great step. But I go develop my own chiplet, whether it's an analog chiplet or a UCIe chiplet. How do I interface it? How do I even test that the darn thing works, right? So as somebody who's wanting, let's say, from the mindset of trying to develop an open chiplet, it's going to be like PCIe. People want to know, how has it been tested? How has it been validated? I actually think there's a business opportunity for somebody should they want to do this, because I think it's a big issue, and we're trying to have sort of a homegrown version of this, but I sure would like the community to come together, or and it can't just be a bunch of wire solution. It's got to be, in my view, it's got to be sort of an open solution, right? Somehow, and I think that's what the market's going to need. That's just my 2 cents. I'll rush through this one because my time's coming up, but
No, wait. Hey, Marek, if you don't mind being delayed to next week, or is it a hard thing for you? If we're having an engaging talk, I'm asking one.
Bobby, you are asking me?
No,
Michael
Marek.
Liu?
No,
Oh.
Marek. I think Marek's on.
Sure. Yeah, I can also talk next week.
Oh, thanks, man. All right, Kash. We owe Marek something at the Bo meeting. So.
Okay. Hey, Marek, a glass of wine on me, man, or your favorite beverage.
No worries.
Yeah, obviously there's no open chiplet market, but we have to take steps, right? So I think that I'm actually really glad that the business part, which I think we've all kind of ignored to a certain extent because we're just working on the technology, is restarting, and the focus on now looking at how do we get this working, how do we get this going, because there's an enormous amount of excitement, and you know what happens, you get excited and then you say, oh my God, this is so difficult, I don't know how I do this, and then people stop, right? So I think that it may not be a very, exciting area, but this, how do I validate this? How do I sell my product? How do people find about, how do I make any money? Because if I'm going to spend 10 or 20 million dollars, there's got to be some roadmap or things put in place, and that's a thing that I'm also concerned about. That we're so busy engineering away that we may be losing an opportunity where you've got all your potential customers are very excited and developed, and then they say, oh, it's going to be too difficult. This is just for the big guys to do closed systems. I see that as a possibility in the next, if things don't become easier to understand, to deploy, to understand the return on investment, all that stuff, right? So I think our timing this year should be, it deserves real effort to try and build an open marketplace.
So if you had to pick one problem as the first most important problem, which one would you pick?
Well, I would say the lack of knowledge, the open knowledge, right? Because everybody's very secretive about what their solution is. And I was really happy to see that D-Matrix and Blue Cheetah were showing some of their information, right? Because it gives the customer credibility, right? And I think that as we do more of that, but it needs to be in some sort of a centralized location where the customer says, I'm interested in chiplets. And I don't want to knock UCIe or OCP, but they're, when you go to the OCP site, you're doing so much, right? That you first have to spend a lot of time even getting to the chiplet part, and then it's all about meetings and it's not being somebody in sales and marketing. It's I can tell you it's not an easy thing to navigate. And to be honest, I haven't been to UCI's page, setup page, but it was all about the number of people that are supporting it and join the consortium, right? So, but from a customer standpoint, it's not it's not suited for that at the moment, right? Obviously, I think both. Anyway, so I think that's something that needs to be developed in the next year, or there will be a huge opportunity lost.
I would certainly agree, Kash. I think that's a good point to make information a little bit more easy to access. Like even having all the documents that are on the Google SharePoints or Google Drives, like maybe having a place where there's information to get started and links to the most impactful talks or workshops that have been for people to catch up. I think that would be, and that website that as a website that's easy to see and read and not kind of go through long lists of meeting minutes to find those information.
Okay.
Okay, I've got one person agreeing at least, so that's good. Okay, so I think I'll hand it over to you, Bapi.
So Kash, not to put you on the spot, but do you have any prediction on, according to your view, when the open marketplace might be realized time-wise? Just curious. You can just kind of share your, subjective thoughts on this.
Yeah, I am hoping that by mid 2024 that there will be enough of an ecosystem, because I know that a lot of people are using Blue Cheetah solution, and obviously Alpha Wave I think is very they don't speak much, but there's a lot going on with their customers. And I know some other customers are doing a lot of internal stuff. Obviously, we're seeing some traction in this space. I think it's a very exciting space. So, yeah. So I think by the time people start seeing real silicon, which is already starting, right? So I think that was a seminal moment. Even if even if it's just early test chips, right? I actually think that's a huge thing, and that would be an important thing for, to promote and show. I thought the webinar yesterday was excellent, by the way. Whether I agree with everything, and nobody agrees with, with anything, right, these days, but I just thought it was very well done. I think we need more of that, where it's not just about the technology. Does that make sense? I know we all want to talk about technology and picojoules per bit and latency and CoWoS, but the customers are looking for maybe a higher level solution. So I think there's some education also that needs to be done in that area, and I think it will happen.
So Cash, actually related to that, because when you look at an open chiplet ecosystem, there are two hurdles. One of them is the technical hurdles. So what you mentioned about the die-to-die, the known good die, the thermal, the testing, that's a technical hurdle. I don't know who's looking at the business hurdle, which is when you need to combine different silicon from different manufacturers.
Right.
Is that being addressed as an open chiplet ecosystem?
I don't think so,
We
not at
do
the
have a
moment, but I
project.
think people are starting, right? People are starting on this, I think. Sorry, Bobby.
I was going to say, we do have a project which I think is the first of its kind that's integrating chiplets from two different vendors into an open project. You can see an open packaging effort. JP is not online, but that exists. You can go see what the package design looks like. You can see what
Yeah, but it
I
doesn't
know.
really, answer the question of, I've got a chiplet, how do I test it, get it tested, right? So I think that's more of a demonstration vehicle of, can we even get two bows to talk to each other, right? So
the point of this sequence of webinar, not webinar, this sequence of conversations is to get that effort started in the business group. You hit the nail on the head. The intent of, we're spending all of February on this topic just for that reason.
Yeah, so
I
the
think it's
question
very
is, so the question is related. If I have a chiplet on TSMC and a chiplet on a global foundry, what is the business hurdle that you're combining those two chiplets?
Right.
So that's, yeah, I think what
And
Bobby
so,
mentioned. Go ahead.
yeah, so what I'd say is, I'm going to actually track that question. Part of our goal with these webinars is to come up with a sequence of questions we want to answer, and then hopefully aggregate enough participants in the business work group to go off and at least propose first order answers to these things.
So I can share, without getting specifics about customers that are doing something like that, right? So, for example, somebody may like Global's 22 nanometer process because you can build very good mixed signal with that, for example, or whatever, right? And then they want to interface that to more of a leading edge baseband type processor, let's say, in a more advanced process. So that would be if one could talk about it, that would be a real world use of that. And I do see some people doing mixing, not just mixing nodes, but mixing different technologies. I mean, obviously optical is an obvious one as well, right? So I think this will drive the part of the market of where a particular technology node is better for a specific application.
Yeah. So Cash, this is Anu.
Yeah.
That these are all really great points, and I think Bapi, as Cash said, there's demonstration vehicles, there's demos going to be in the next few months, lots of silicon coming out. But to address like the real chiplet ecosystem, there was one presentation at the summit, and I don't know who did it, but I have a colleague of mine attended it, and I have some information. And whoever presented was talking about, if you're selling your chiplet, do you want to reveal the wafer yield? Do you want to give up your revenue from product packaging? Will tier one companies sell their chiplets to you? So I think there's a lot of unanswered questions there, and I know that the technology is getting more solidified, and so I guess the next step is to sort of look at how does it make it economically viable to create a system like this.
I know you nailed it there. That's exactly the challenge on sharing the information from different foundries as a chiplet provider. You just nailed the problem in there.
I wish I could give you a solution, but no, I only have the problem.
Well, I do want to distinguish between must answer questions and nice to have answer questions, in the sense that, in my mind, a must answer question is something that will prevent the adoption, and nice to have is something that will increase the adoption. And is that, this whole, like, all this information needs to be revealed, a must answer question. I'm asking, not complaining. Can you develop enough so that the market can get started without this question being answered in its entirety?
So Mike Bartley, Bappy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so just one point I heard earlier, and I think as was mentioned in the presentation, there's possibly a business opportunity for somebody here to be an independent arbiter of compatibility of different chiplets. I think there is a business opportunity there for that. So some companies set themselves up as a service provider to say, yeah, you can, like we're doing with the Blue Cheetah and D-Matrix, to look at different, if we do think they're compatible, whether we're going to be able to integrate them onto a single board. So I think there is a business opportunity there for somebody, because there's a lots of integration things you need to worry about in terms of yield, test strategy, overall verification. So I may put that to TestSolve, because TestSolve could be a solution provider there.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Michael from JSA. I would second Mike's idea there. I think we probably need a FCC for chiplets, if you will. I'm just using a terrible analogy, but a third-party authority that can provide some guidelines or at least some reference points when it comes to qualifying chiplets from different vendors across the industry. Yeah.
All right, Kash, you've done it again. You've wasted everyone's time by giving an engaging talk.
All right. Sorry, how do I exit this stupid my screen?
No, you're exited. You're not.
I've exited.
You're all
Okay,
good.
good.
I made Michael the presenter.
Perfect.
Michael Liu, it's all yours, man.
Okay. Let me share my screen.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Bobby, for inviting me. Good morning, everyone. Where's my? Unfortunately, I use Microsoft Teams more than GoToMeeting, so that's a bad. Let me open up.
We're seeing your email.
Babby, okay. Can you see my PPT now?
No, we see your email.
Oh,
your Outlook.
okay. Oh, sorry.
But luckily, it's just the message you sent to me.
Can you see the presentation slides?
No, it's still the wrong screen somehow.
Oh, okay.
No worries, take your time.
Okay. Sorry, try to navigate this GoToMeeting thing. Window. This one?
Yep, now we see it.
Okay, good. So Bobby, I didn't know we could, create our own slides. So I use Ravi's template instead of being creative on the presentation.
I think that's perfect, right? Thank you.
Thank you. So I really appreciate Kashi's presentation. He did a very good job covering a lot of ground on this topic of open chiplet ecosystem. So that's very helpful. I don't need to repeat a lot of details. So it has been a while since I last talked here, almost a year. About a year ago, one of my calls for action was on the conversions of standards, and also I remember proposing having a RACI matrix: responsibility, accountability, consultation, and inform matrix across the chiplet supply chain. After a year, a lot of things have changed, obviously. From JSA's perspective, we are a major global OSAC solution provider. We stay very active in the chiplet community. We participated in OCP summits, and we joined UCIe consortium like everyone else. We have now almost 90 active UCIe members in the community. One thing doesn't really change. A lot of questions circling around, especially side, business challenge side. Kash and the team talk about technical hurdles. I agree, as compared to 1 year ago. And a number of other standards,
Hey, Michael?
CSL. Yep.
I don't know if it's just me, or at least for me, you faded out a bit in the middle.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Maybe it's my microphone.
I don't know. Anybody else have the same problem, or is it just me?
It was actually.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, from JSA's perspective, unfortunately, as an OSAT, we don't see a lot of improvement on the business side or business challenges side. A lot of things persist, if you will, as challenges to us. So today, without getting into any technical details or repeating what Kash just presented on the overviews on the data type standards and ecosystem economics, I just want to use one example that we have experienced very recently from OSA's perspective. So the good news is that we started manufacturing chiplets or chiplet-based packages not too long ago, about 2 months ago or 3 months ago, for a couple of tier 1 customers. Obviously, I cannot disclose their names due to confidentiality. Mainly for 2.1D or 2.5D configurations. By 2.1D, I mean side-by-side, standard MCM type of implementations. 2.5D, we have a HBM involved. So that's one of the chiplets for the whole package. The HBM is 16 nanometer, and the ASIC or the GPU is 4 or 5 nanometer technology. And we don't have an open chiplet system. Obviously, this is a closed loop. Using Kash's term earlier, this is closed loop chiplet ecosystem. We have 2 suppliers of chiplets. One is actually our customer. And
I'm sorry, are you on the page 1 still?
Oh, still on page 1?
Yeah, I see only the page 1.
Okay, let me. I guess the Microsoft Teams is better. Yeah, so this is a breakdown. I'm using Ravi's template to give the team a breakdown. So this is the project I mentioned earlier. It's a closed ecosystem, 2 suppliers of chiplets. One is our customer. So one product is in HVM, high volume manufacturing stage, starting from January. We have a PR article. You can see the link below. and we have a couple more in LVM. So from OSAS term or from JSAS perspective, LVM means below 1,000 wafers per month. So it's not much. So target customer types, either fabless or OEM companies shooting for HPC, 5G communications, consumer wearable, or autonomous driving vehicles, on the computing side. Major business problems, I wouldn't call them problems, business challenges, like I mentioned earlier, they have persisted over the last year or so. We don't really have a truly open ecosystem. Everything is closed loop, everything is consigned, everything is confidential. And like I said earlier, we have exclusive known good die sources. One is the customer, the other one is a third-party contractor. Thus, there's no wiggle room when it comes to supply chain, when it comes to lead time improvement, when it comes to cost in negotiation, nothing. So everything is consigned. From OSAS perspective, on the implementation side, we have pretty heavy front-loading investment when it comes to equipment, when it comes to process flow, when it comes to quality control, with very little risk mitigation, meaning everything is consigned, everything is built to print. And from a protocol or interconnect perspective, they are pre-burned, if you will, or pre-programmed into the chiplets before they ship to OSATs, like us. So there's no visibility when it comes to, risk planning, testability, qualification control, those kind of things. And forward-looking, we have very poor visibility when it comes to time to market, demand funnel. Obviously, as an OSAT, as a supplier, we will always ask the customer, "Hey, what's your demand funnel? What's your next year's or next quarter's demand look like?" They wouldn't tell us to our face that they don't have a good idea, but from their facial expression or body language, we can tell, they don't. They're also struggling with the outlooks, if you will. So, in summary, everything seems to be, vague and not very clear when it comes to building a business case around the triplet project, to be honest. So the impression we got from the customer or customers is that they are also doing a lot of trying errors on their own. So overall speaking, this is still an experimental project to them. And as their loyal supplier, we basically tag along on this ride. So that, to me, I think everyone will agree that's a huge business risk for any OSATs or any kind of suppliers. So
can you elaborate on the first bullet, exclusive KGD source? I understand the second two from my notes.
Yeah, so basically from incoming IQC incoming quality control perspective, we don't have anything, I would say, physical from the supplier. They hand us a piece of paper, we call it compliance letter, or letter of compliance, and basically we have to trust them on each and every detail on that piece of paper. Obviously, when we receive the parts, the known good dies, we will carry out our sampling test. But our difficulty or our challenge here is what to test for, because they don't really spell out the benchmarks for us to verify one by one. So on that part, I would like to cite a famous saying: "Your product is as good as your documentation." I think in Cash's presentation earlier, we touched upon this topic. In order for chiplets to become an truly open commodity, if you will, documentation is the key. So each and every chiplet source or chiplet supplier will need to do an excellent job in documenting their chiplets before they start distributing the chiplets into the marketplace. Otherwise, we are all operating in the dark, if you will. And basically, we have to, instead of just trusting the letter of compliance, we want to, have a better visibility when it comes to receiving the chiplets for mass production. So I just want to bring up an example. Maybe this is not welcome here. I have been very deep in UCIe test work group discussions, and UCIe, in my opinion, everything else we can debate on everything else, but when it comes to documentation, they truly have done a pretty good job, in my personal opinion, when it comes to storing the meeting minutes, distributing the meeting minutes, as well as documenting each and every ECNs or presentations. So I think that's something we can at least borrow from. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I have for today. So in summary, from OSAS perspective, chiplet is never open. It stays closed loop. We don't have any small players, if you will. We haven't really worked with any small players or small companies when it comes to chiplets. The only people who can afford providing us with chiplets or providing us with valuable test vehicles are still tier one companies, either fabless or OEM companies, or maybe I would like to call them people with money and resources. So that's please consider this as the maybe a State of the Union report from an OSAS perspective. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Michael. This is good. I think like one point that I would like to make here, and I'm going to draw a parallel with IPs, because right now we're working with a bunch of the government and DoD. So they're driving an MQA, the microelectronic quality assurance. And if you look at that, the manual, the 5200, it focuses on IP. There is no section related to chiplet. And I know the DoD and USG are very interested in the chiplet. So the quality assurance that you're addressing, I think Shak, you're the one that mentioned we need an FCC for a chiplet, and this is where potentially an intercept of the microelectronic quality assurance and expanding it to a chiplet, because we're not only addressing system on chips, but we're addressing the system of chips. So both kind of the disaggregation and the system on chip as well, IP and chiplet. So potentially that would be a path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the reason I brought up FCC as an analogy is I think a chiplet, Cash talk about security, talk about, we all know that the chips are important, critical to everything that we do today. FCC, they have done a very good job in in regulating the EMC or EMI perspective of the RF wireless communications world, if you will. So we need a comparable authority like FCC for chiplets, meaning we need to take it very seriously, just like what we have been using FCC for RF communications. We need someone who is authoritative enough so that everyone else will be willing to listen to them.
Bobby, I have a conflict, so I need to drop now.
All right. We're at the top of the hour. Any questions for Michael? Hey, Michael, thanks for doing this. Appreciate it, as always.
Thank you, Bobby.
Marek, I'll either push you to next week. Well, I'll sync with you offline.
Sounds good. Okay.
And Mark, I'll put you in 2 weeks. Is Mark still online or did he drop? He dropped. All right. Anybody else who wants to do a business challenge presentation, we can extend it to March, but it feels like these are, oh, Mark, you're still here. So I'll put you in 2 weeks. This feels like a good engaged discussion. So if your company wants to do it, please get in touch with Ravi or me. Anybody with any questions, opens? All right. If not, have a good weekend.
Thanks, Bobby.
Yeah.